All right, it is 6:39. Let's see what's in the papers this morning with former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and our senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
What's going on in The Guardian, Nigel? Has he actually... What disturbs him more than anything else is someone... Is it Sir John Curtis has used the phrase dull as dishwater?
Exactly, when it should be ditchwater. Yes, yes. The headline...
I didn't know that.
Yes,
I've always said dishwater.
No, I mean, because obviously ditchwater is...
stagnant and horrible.
Basically. And what The Guardian have done is they've put ditchwater correctly in the headline, but then quoted John Curtis as saying dishwater.
Yeah.
Either way...
corrected him by the sound of it in the headline.
Yes, that's right. Either way, what he's arguing is that one of the reasons why there might be a low turnout at the coming election is that our politicians are as dull as either ditchwater or dishwater, whichever one it is.
Well, at least dishwater's slightly soapy. I suppose that's the...
And just saying that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are not the most charismatic figures on earth, as we know. I think probably because we've got used to politicians who are. Boris Johnson obviously had huge charisma. Whatever you think about his ability as a Prime Minister...
You would never call him dull.
No, exactly. And the same with Nigel Farage. I mean, you've got somebody out there who probably is the most charismatic politician now on the circuit and has been for years. So it is perfectly true that our leaders at the moment just are a bit dull.
Is it that? Or is it that we actually, the great British public, don't trust politicians anymore? We're absolutely fed up with them.
Well, I think that's a large part of it, and I don't think that being a bit dull and boring is necessarily a bad thing in politics. You want your Chancellor to look exactly what a Chancellor should look like, a little bit dull and an accountancy type look about them. You want your Health Secretary to look as if they have spent time in hospitals and just... You don't
as a
want...
doctor or something, rather than
Well, yes, clearly as a doctor or a nurse or a paramedic. But I'm just this whole cult of personality, and we've seen it in America, and their elections are all about personality. It's the individual person. It isn't... The party is kind of secondary. So I think that... People are fed up with politicians. People are fed up with politicians who don't keep to their word and they don't trust them. So I think perhaps a little bit of dull and boring is not a bad thing for the country.
You kind of want your sort of Prime Minister to be a bit like your bank manager, don't you? You want to sort of feel, well, provided you've got a decent bank manager.
Reliable and trustworthy.
Yes, that sort of idea, that the idea of being dull, I'd rather just manage the country. Well, a lot of things go wrong because they want to change everything
But then we need to be inspired, don't we, a little bit? I mean, I'm slightly torn because you can be all charisma and no policy. But you need a little bit of excitement, don't you?
Yes, you do, but not too much. And it is one of those things, you want somebody competent, you want somebody that looks like they're going to be able to run something. A little bit of a joke and a twinkle in the eye, not a bad thing. You look back to... We all do this with rose-tinted spectacles, look back at other politicians over the years, the characters of Michael Heseltine, of Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet, for example, Tony Blair and some of his cabinet.
I mean, Tony Blair and David Cameron both were very funny in private.
But they were, but it's also the people around them, and sometimes you need to be able to steady the ship, and you don't mind having a few people that can crack a couple of jokes, but as long as it's not going too far and they still keep on with the job, then, yeah, I agree that a little bit of personality is not a bad thing. Too much is not needed.
Is there an argument that if there is a very low turnout for the next election, at least you'll get the votes of the people who are committed enough to turn out?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way of arguing it.
Which might be a more serious vote?
Well, I mean, I always sort of see it a slightly different way. I mean, the 1950 was the highest turnout ever, 84%, and the lowest was 59% under Tony Blair, his second term. I put that down to people didn't turn out to vote because they were broadly pretty happy with what was going on. So they felt, well, what's the point? He's going to win anyway. We're quite happy with him. We don't want to register a protest vote. I think that if people just turn out because they've had enough of politics, that's the wrong reason to do it. Even if you don't want to vote, at least show that you've got the energy to get to the polling station and say something rude about the candidates, because the one thing is the candidates will see your spoilt ballot paper.
Do they?
They do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the best bit of any election, to be honest. It's a miserable process. It's really stressful. and then you get called up to see the spoilt ballots. Because you can go through, you can argue if you believe that the picture of part of an anatomy is in your particular box. You can say that is a registered vote because it is a deliberate mark in a box next to a name.
Well, when Claire was standing for local election last time round in May, Claire's a Tory. I've never voted Tory in my life, so there was that. Obviously, she expected me to vote for her, and this caused me some sort of struggle of conscience. So the only way I could see of doing it was to spoil my ballot paper in a way that Claire would get the vote. So I drew a little picture in the box next to her name. She saw it when it came up at the count. She claimed the vote, while other people were appalled at the little drawing of the anatomy I'd used.
It was hysterical because there were some other candidates who said, but that's awful. Whereas I'm just corpsing with laughter because I knew precisely who had done it at this point, because it was like, that's quite a message to send. But you can argue that there indeed is a valid mark on a ballot paper. The intention to vote was there, and it makes the whole process a lot more interesting.
You dirty old...
That's brilliant. But that's an interesting... I mean, is it responsible or irresponsible to say to people, even if you really don't want to vote, turn up, cast your vote, but spoil your paper and have your say?
Yeah, well,
I think fair enough,
compulsory. I would make it compulsory, and therefore, if you don't want to vote, you can just spoil your paper.
But then you miss the bit about people being happy. That it should be a right not to vote, and not to vote in a sense as a political statement too. So
is it? I don't know. Well, I think it is for some people. I think a lot of people just can't be bothered.
Well, but that's why urge everyone to go out and vote to show you can be bothered. It would be awful to just think everyone's just complacent about it. So let's get people out, certainly. But if you decide not to, and that's a real decision, I think that probably is fair enough. And compelling people to vote, I'm not terribly comfortable with.
But then you do get to the situation where when people don't vote and they're very proud of the fact that they didn't bother voting, but then will still moan about the incumbent in Westminster. And you sort of look at them and think, well, if you wanted to change it, you should have registered your vote in any way for any party, spoil your ballot paper, but be part of the process. And then you kind of almost have that right to moan about it.
Yeah.
That is interesting because that's a message as well to people who live in constituencies which are probably very much always going to go one way. You think, what's the point of voting because my vote wouldn't count? It'll always be that guy, or whatever. But if you actually turned up and wrote a little message saying, I wish my vote made a difference. I know it's not going to, but these are the reasons.
Yeah, which is ideal. I mean, the trouble about our electoral system, I mean, first past the post, I think, actually generally works because it delivers a proper government. But the downside is exactly your point, Anne, that in many constituencies, your vote really doesn't count for very much. It's something like 200,000 votes make a difference at a general election, that's all. And that's in the very marginal seats.
Slightly depressing when you put it like that. Claire, well, maybe that will all change. Thanks to the Chancellor, who is
waving his magic wand
with more tax cuts.
Well, I mean, this is all on the proviso that the reports, the economic reports that come out are favourable enough to make the tax cuts. That's always the caveat from a Chancellor. They don't want to do anything until we've had the proper forecast and the information given to him. But Jeremy Hunt is teasing us all with some large tax cuts to come up in March.
Large.
And then also he's dangling the prospect of having even further tax cuts in a November fiscal event should the timing of the election allow. Because we don't know when the election is going to be, he's planning to make these sort of two fiscal events look very attractive. Whether he can do both of them remains to be seen, but I think it's very important for what is coming up in March. It's going to set the tone for the election campaign going forward. We have the largest level of taxation for some time. I don't think there would be anybody that would say they didn't want a tax cut. But it's a confusing message to give to people to say, on the one hand, you can't afford certain things because there isn't enough money, and inflation is still relatively high. It is dropping, but the economy is not bouncing back as we were told it would. So to promise an awful lot of big tax cuts, I think is... It's electioneering. I don't think we can put it down to anything more than that. I would be delighted if it happens. I really, really will. But it has to come not at a cost to the rest of the economy and further grouping of austerity charges that come in after that.
I just think, why are they focusing on this? Is, looking at 2p reduction in national insurance and all the rest of it. That's there's all this stuff which has gone on recently. It all gets very confusing. Would thresholds not be the way forward?
Yeah, and this is probably where he would go anyway. That at the moment you've got a situation where, because they've frozen personal allowance and tax thresholds till 2028, that means that there will be 4 million people who will be paying tax for the first time because of the personal allowance, that they're above personal allowance. Then you've got people being dragged into higher tax bands. That would be about 7 million people by 28. Those are the areas that you really need to deal with. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, was talking in Davos yesterday about the idea of trying to target those things. All this really though is on the back of whether or not you get inflation down. We've had the uptick in inflation this week, and it's dangerous to give any tax cuts when inflation is still double the Bank of England target.
Yeah. It's...
But we're in elections.
It costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
well, we are in elections.
I mean, I think that is blatantly obvious that everything that comes out at the moment from everybody is gearing up to an election. So everybody wants to look as though they're going to make you feel better, happier, richer, whatever it may be. But the ultimate thing is whether the OBR reports and all the other financial reports that go into making a budget fall into line. Unless that happens, it would be massively irresponsible to start promising tax cuts.
Talking of saving money, in a way, though I don't know how it would save us any money, according to the Daily Mail, someone's said that the Princess of Wales should have gone to the NHS for her operation, whatever it is she's had.
Yeah, this is a doctor who I believe formerly worked within the NHS, suggested that if Princess of Wales had gone into the NHS, she would have been hoofed out within a couple of days to go and recover at home. Now,
Well, she probably would be, yes.
But you can't really compare the facts that, yes, it's unfortunate, and I think a lot of people would benefit from extra time in hospital, but then there is the flip side of it. The longer you stay in hospital, the more nasty bugs you tend to pick up. And I think it really depends on the individual, it depends on the procedure that they've undertaken and what their home life is like.
Yeah.
And I think
also,
there are problems within the NHS, but I don't think it's particularly fair to use the Princess of Wales and whatever operation she has had to make a political point like that.
Most of us don't come out of hospital after an operation having to look $1 million and be...
Absolutely.
And be papped all the way.
Yeah.
Nigel, we've just got to a couple of minutes to look at the Sun and what is, I mean, for Catholics at least, almost the 11th commandment.
Indeed.
Thou shalt.
And this is the Pope who is telling his flock that sexual pleasure is a gift from God. Don't get involved in the demon porn, he says, on the basis that that is sort of sex without a relationship. And he talks about if you don't have love in your life, then you could be condemned to a lifetime of sad loneliness. Have to say, it's a bit odd to hear a celibate single man giving relationship advice, but that's what the Pope's decided to do.
Do we not think that the demon porn sounds a little bit niche? It's a really odd thing for the head of the Catholic Church.
I know where you're going with that. I tell you what, though, this is... What astounds me with this, I mean, it's front page news.
Of the Star.
In the Star.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's just the idea that what have Catholics up until now been feeling guilty about having relations with their husbands or wives or whatever?
Well,
I think that their husbands and wives are OK.
Yeah,
it's
husbands
actually
and
with
wives
other
are okay.
people.
But also, I mean, in the olden days, it was only for procreation,
yes,
wasn't it? It wasn't for pleasure.
It wasn't for enjoyment.
The difference here is that the Pope... No, I think you're allowed that pleasure as long as it
I think in medieval
baby.
times they still enjoyed sex, for instance.
Well, yes, but they were in denial about it, weren't they? But to hear the Pope actually say you're allowed to
Enjoy yourself.
Enjoy yourself, yeah.
It's quite something in 2024
Yeah, I
that
think
we
it
rely
probably
upon
is.
this message to come from the
It's amazing that what age is he still even thinking
Yeah,
about
exactly.
Yeah, I do find it. I
Good
do
for
find it
Pope
very odd.
Francis.
It's like a statement of the ridiculously obvious.
It is, and you wonder how many people feel better for hearing it. I'm not sure it's that many.
Some will.
Oh, some will, yes.
Yeah, some will. Oh, well, there you go.
Actually,
I'm always a bit
interestingly-
lost for words.
I was going to say, interestingly, did he say it had to be man-woman sex, or did he just talk about sex generally?
He didn't specify that.
That's interesting too.
Yes, although I'd imagine that he was actually thinking in those terms. A man
don't
and a woman.
know.
So he
you
has
don't know.
proved to be a little bit more liberal on that front.
Yes, I suppose, yes. I mean, the world is obviously changing completely, and it takes the church quite a few years to actually catch up with everybody else.
Several decades.
Yes,
Yes.
the
Catch
fact
up.
he wasn't specific is probably a step forward.
Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
Fascinating.
Right, you two, thank you very much. I've just tell you what we haven't talked about, but it's caught my eye because I had no idea. Baron Trump, it was his grandmother's funeral yesterday, so it's not a happy story. She's 6'7", apparently.
What?
17, he's 6'7".
And apparently that's because of his now dead grandmother. She was very tall, and apparently there were tall genes in the family.
There you go.